Good afternoon, everybody. This is Janet Noak, and I'm here with my co-host, Tim Coons, and we are ready to dig into the changes in the PPP and EIDL forgiveness that happened in the Paycheck Flexibility Act on June 5th of 2020. So we are recording this and it will be available on our website later today. So if you want to go back to see anything that we are talking about right now, you will be able to do so. So generally, Tim will give the instructions about how to use the Zoom. However, we're having a little technology challenge this afternoon, so I will be giving the instructions. Tim is working with me behind the scenes though, and he will be helping to answer any of the questions you send in. So if you want to take a look at the screen right now, the first thing I would love for you to do is to maximize your screen. We are going to be looking at the PPP forgiveness application, and we're going to be looking at some rules that will take up most of your screen. So I would love it if you had it as big as it could be today. Also, if you have a question, please do not use the chat button. The chat button is for, we're just not using the chat button today. We're going to use the Q&A today. So if you send any questions over in Q&A, Tim will be able to read those to me and I will be able to get them answered. We do have a large group of people on today, so I don't know if I'll get them all answered, but if I don't get it answered, I will get back to you immediately following the webinar with an answer by email. So hopefully we'll get them all answered. Hopefully this is pretty straightforward and clear, although we've thought that many times before with the PPP loan guidance. So we are recording this. We'll publish it to our YouTube channel and to our website. If you simply go to CPA of Florida/blog, B-L-O-G, or just go to CPA of Florida and click the blog button, you will be able to see all the webinars we've done on this topic. So with that said, let's get started. Let's get into this and let's see what we can do to get through this information. So the PPP Flexibility Act was passed on June 5th of 2020. Some interesting information about the act was new guidance that was passed in a unanimous voice vote in the Senate. And it actually had to be a unanimous vote because the Senate was not officially in session, which meant that if one senator wanted to question it by having a no vote, then they could force the matter to be delayed until the Senate returned to Washington with enough members for a quorum and for a vote. So if it wasn't unanimous, then there would have been quite a delay in getting this done. So good news, they got it done. The big issue they were facing and why time was so critical is because the first funded PPP loans were just coming to the 8-week time period when they had to determine whether they were going to apply for forgiveness or whether there was going to be another option. So it was critically important that they passed it quickly. So it was passed in a unanimous voice vote. There was only one concession in that vote. That was that Senate Leader Mitch McConnell agreed to add a letter to the congressional record stating that June 30th remains the deadline for loan applications. So that means the final date to apply for these loans is June 30th. Today is June 29th, so that is tomorrow. That will be the last day you can actually apply. That has not changed in anything that we have seen, and I don't see an extension coming on that. So there are still PPP funds available. In the event you have not been funded yet, you can either send Tim a Q&A and let him know that you might like to learn about that, or you could call our office, but there are still PPP funds available. They're just not available at the big banks. So some of the smaller banks still do have funds available, and we can help to put that together if you need that. Now, one of the new conditions in loans funded after June 5th is that prior the borrowers had 2 years at 1% interest if they had to repay the loan. Now it's loans after 6/5 of 20, they actually have 5 years to repay, because if you think about that, 2 years was a pretty quick turnaround time for the repayment. So it does not change the repayment time if you received your funds before June 5th of 2020. So don't think that you can just not apply for forgiveness and extend your payments out, because likely you cannot. So the other big news in the Paycheck Protection Flexibility Act is that the new bill allows employers to defer payment of payroll taxes, which was prohibited under the CARES Act. So let me talk about that for 1 minute. What they allowed in the CARES Act is you could not pay your payroll taxes. So let's say you're paying $10,000 to your employees on your payroll, and you have $2,500 due in payroll taxes. If you didn't receive a PPP Act, you could hold that money and not pay it until half of it 12/31/21 and half of it 12/31/22. Now they have changed it that even though you received the PPP Act, you can defer paying those payroll taxes. It is not a forgiveness, it is a deferral. So if you are cash tight right now and you want to consider deferring your payroll taxes, you can do that. So if you know that, for instance, that you're going to pick up after, maybe you need to make it till next season to be able to fully recover from losing some of the business because this shutdown happened during season in Florida. So if you need to do that, it is an option. I would suggest you set an appointment with your CPA or whoever you're working with on this to fully understand what that means to you. But it is an option, but it is not a grant, it is simply a deferral. So keep that in mind. Okay, so for those of you that have seen some of my other webinars, this is going to look a little bit familiar. However, there are a lot of changes on the slides. So let's make sure we fully understand what those are. So when they first announced the guidance for forgiveness, they said, you know what, if you're less than $2 million in PPP funds, we're just going to put a box on the application for forgiveness where you will be able to have you will say, I'm under $2 million, pretty much I don't need a lot of attention. So they created a check the box, and it actually says on the forgiveness application, if borrower, together with affiliates if applicable, receive PPP loans in excess of $2 million, check here. So if you didn't get more than $2 million, you're probably not going to be audited on this. You're going to be spot checked, but not audited. So that's an important thing to know. Let's see. So they do have the right to audit any PPP loan, so don't think you're not going to get audited, but everybody above $2 million will be fully audited by the SBA. So if you're under $2 million, you may not get audited. If they audit you and you don't like the outcome, you will be able to appeal the SBA determination within 30 days of the receipt of the audit findings. So the appeals process has not yet been established. So that is something that's important. It's not much of a change in the PPP Flexibility Act. The big change in the Flexibility Act is that we went from 8 weeks to use the money to 24 weeks to use the money. So both options begin with the date of the loan disbursement or the date that coincides with your next payroll. So if your payroll began a week or closed a week after your loan was funded, you can actually move your dates by a week. So it's called the alternative payroll covered period. Now, one thing that's in the CARES Act is that if you pay bi-weekly or more frequently, you can use the alternate period. But if you pay semi-monthly, so if you pay twice a month or you pay monthly, you won't be able to do that. So if you want to use the 24-week period, you've got to use you got to be paying bi-weekly or more frequently. So current borrowers can choose to extend the 8-week period to 24 weeks, or elect to keep the 8-week period. No period can extend between 12/31 of 20, which if they leave the current deadline of June 31 or June 30 of 20, it's not even possible to extend that far. So currently that's not an option, but it is in the act. So a couple of things, let's talk about what qualifies, what you can spend the money on. You can spend the money on mortgage interest for mortgages existing February 15th of 20, business rent during your covered period. So we just talked about that in the previous slide, what your covered period will be. Business lease payments. So if you have a copy machine in the office that you have a lease payment on, but it had to be in effect February 15th of 20. Business vehicles, if you had them February 15th of 20 and they were leased, you can count those. Business utility payments for service that began before February 15th of 20. And the interesting thing on utility is they are counting electricity, gas, water, transportation, telephone, and internet access. I don't know what they're calling transportation. There is no definition on that yet, but it is transportation. So if that means auto expense, I don't know exactly what they're counting. So that's called a utility payment. And the key is now with the new PPP Flexibility Act, it can't exceed 40% of the total forgiveness amount. Before it was 25%, but now it's 40%. So that's very important. You can spend an extra 15% on rent, car payments, interest. So that's a good thing. So that's one of the big changes that came about with the PPP Flexibility Act. Now let's talk about the payroll forgiveness. In the past, it was a maximum of $15,385 for each employee because that was 8 weeks based on $100,000 per year. Now it's $46,154 if 24 weeks are elected per employee. So that's a big number now. Should not have any problem because you were only given 10 weeks of payroll dollars. Now that if you have 24 weeks to use it, then you shouldn't have any problem using up that money. Now let's talk about a couple of things on payroll. First of all, the new act clarifies that bonuses qualify as our hazard pay and payments to furloughed employees. So also additional wages paid to tipped employees are eligible for forgiveness. Now, if payroll costs are incurred during the borrower's last pay period of the covered period, they're eligible for forgiveness as long as they're paid by the next payroll date. So let me make that a little simpler. It simply says, as long as the money is earned during the covered period and you pay it in the next payroll, you're good. If you hold it for some reason for several payrolls, you're not good. So as long as you pay it in the next eligible payroll, you're good. That will be eligible for forgiveness. The PPPFA reduced the amount needed to be used for payroll to 60%. So in the original Flexibility Act, they made it a cliff, which meant that if you didn't spend 60% on payroll, you got no forgiveness. But then they actually said, okay, that was wrong, and they've made a correction on that. So now it is a sliding scale again. So if you don't spend 60% on payroll, you won't give up 100% of your PPP forgiveness. And also they clarified the owner's salary, and the owner's salary cannot exceed now either 8 weeks or 24 weeks in the 2019 year. So if you look at the slide, the owner employees, if they're at 8 weeks, they're at $15,385 based on being $100,000 or more in payroll in 2019. If you only paid yourself $50,000 in 2019, that number gets cut in half. So the $15,385 is based on 8 weeks of your 2019 weekly salary. There is a cap for an owner of $20,833 being forgiven, no matter which pay period you select. So you're going to have a cap on that. And actually, that is the number that many people who were sole proprietors and independent contractors were actually funded $20,833. That was a very common number that was funded. So they are putting some limitations. They want you to use the money for employees, and they're not trying to have you just give yourself a bonus and call it forgiven. So that there was a reason for that. So if we actually go back now, we're going to move forward on to what you can add on to your payroll. Tim, are we getting any questions?
No.
Okay.
Questions this time.
Perfect. Okay. So the payroll add-ons that are allowed are health insurance, 401k matching, state and local taxes, but not federal taxes. So that's very important to note. If you are looking at your Social Security and Medicare taxes for employees, that is the employer portion, those are not eligible for forgiveness. The employee portion is. So that's a very important distinction. And to this date, no guidance has been provided for vision, dental, short-term, long-term disability, or life insurance. I also want to note right now that the self-employed individuals, so if you are just one person that got that magic 20,833 number, they have now clarified that you cannot use your PPP money to pay for your health insurance or retirement funding. So if you are a sole proprietor or you are an independent contractor, there has been clarification that those will not qualify for forgiveness. Okay. So full-time employees, who are they? That's the average. The AICPA asked to have a 30-hour work week to call it a full-time employee. The SBA adopted a 40-hour work week. Ultimately, we've gone over this in a couple of other webinars in depth, so I'm not going to spend much time on it. However, you have to have maintained 75% of your full-time employees. If you haven't, you may be subject to reductions. So it would maybe be that you wouldn't get 100% of your loan forgiven. Like I said, I've gone over this in depth, so I suggest if you're not clear on this point, if you just want to zip over to one of my other webinars, we'll go over that. If you have had a reduction in employees, though, there are some exceptions. So it doesn't count. You don't have to count that person as a full-time employee reduction if there are a few things that happen, and the Flexibility Act added 2 new ones. So let's go through the old ones first. If you gave them a job offer in writing and they never came back to work, great. You don't have to count that employee. If you fired them for cause, they came back to work and they were doing a horrible job, or they voluntarily resigned, you don't have to count them. If they voluntarily requested a reduction of hours, maybe they have someone at home that they need to take care of who couldn't, a child in school or something, and they needed a reduction of hours, you don't have to count them. New that's added in the Flexibility Act, though, is what if you couldn't find qualified employees? Because we all know that there have not been a lot of people out looking for work because the unemployment boost of $600 per week, that is ending July 31st, unless there's some other legislation that extends it. But if you can't find someone to come to work, you're not going to get penalized. So you will still be able to get full forgiveness of the PPP. Also, if you couldn't restore due to operating restrictions. So for instance, if you're a restaurant and you were closed for 5 weeks, and then you had to be at 25% for 3 weeks, and then you could only go to 50% for 2 more weeks. And then they said, okay, you can open the bar. And now they've said you have to close the bar. So they're not going to penalize you because there were rules as to how you could actually operate. So those are two really great new ways that they've said, okay, you're still going to be able to get forgiveness. The two that I can think of are restaurants and spas that have been very difficult to reopen and get back to the numbers. So those are new exceptions in the Flexibility Act. Now, if you were not able to restore your workforce level to the February 15th of 20 levels, it's going to be okay. So we're going to get past that now. So that actually, in that case, you would be a great candidate to do the 24-week election, because that would give you a lot more time to spend the money. So the other thing that they have made easier is that they're not going to penalize you as much if employees if they have their wages reduced. So it's still a consideration. Once again, I have gone into this in detail on other webinars, so I'm not going to spend much time on this piece here. But the new rule says if you're restored by June 30th, no reduction in forgiveness applies. So you're good on that. And once again, there's a little bit of a rope. You get a little longer rope if you were struggling to not reduce people's hours and pay. So we're not going to cover the borrowers using the 24-week period to restore their workforce level. Now you have until December 31st, not February 15th. That's a correction from what I said before. So now you have until December 31st, but if you request forgiveness before then, it takes into account the date that you request the forgiveness. So if you request forgiveness on September 1st, you have to have restored your full-time employees by September 1st or have the exemptions. So the exemptions count on whatever day you apply for forgiveness. So that is one thing that's also new. Okay, so now let's get into the forgiveness applications. I'm hoping this isn't too wordy on the screen, so let's see how we work. So there are two applications that you have a choice to use. One is the Form 3508 and one is Form 3508EZ. The EZ is the most recent form, and these are both SBA forms, not IRS forms. So that's an important distinction. So these applications can be filed anytime on or before the maturity date of the loan. So yes, you can file during your 24-week period. So let's say you get to the end of your 8 weeks and you still have some money left. You can just elect to use the 24-week period instead. And at the end of 10 weeks, when you've used all your money, you can actually file for the forgiveness. So you don't have to wait the entire 24 weeks to do that. So if you do file before the end of your covered period, you're going to have to use your full-time employee number at the filing date, as I mentioned before. So you don't want to file if you're low on employees compared to February 15th of 20. You want to be able to get that 100% forgiveness. So that's important. If you don't apply for forgiveness within 10 months of the last day of the covered period, the loan is no longer deferred and you have to begin paying principal and interest. So let's put that into some real dates. So if you got your loan March 1st and 8 weeks was April 25th, then you can either elect to call that your covered period, or you could take the 24-week option. So you could say March 1st, that's March, April, May. So call it June 1st. That would be the end of your 24 weeks. 10 months after which date you call the end, you have to have either filed for forgiveness or begun repayment. So in the example of the 8-week period, so you'd have March, April, then you'd have May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December, January, February. So February, you would be required to start paying. If you take the 24-week period, you'd have until 24 weeks after March 1st. So that's March, April, May, so June 1st. And then you'd have 10 months from June 1st to begin paying your loan back. So they have given some flexibility about when you would actually need to start paying this and when you need to file the application. Once your application is filed, and you would file it with your bank that you got the loan from, the lender, your bank, has 60 days to review the application for forgiveness and issue a decision to the SBA, at which time the SBA will pay them. The SBA then has 90 days to review the application and remit the money to the lender. So that's 90, 150 days. So I definitely would say, don't think you're not going to get audited. Don't think you're not going to get questions. That's 6 months of time from when it goes from the lender to the SBA that this is all going to be finalized. So there is some time that's going to happen. The application forms are Form 3508 or 3508EZ, and they are filed online with your lender. So neither the form nor the EZ form mentions blanket forgiveness, which they had talked about. If your PPP was below a certain amount, you would get blanket forgiveness. At this point, that is not the case. And the main difference between the two forms is that the EZ form does not require more detail on Schedule A, which is an addition to Form 3508, which will be required if you have to report like the exceptions of why you didn't have as many full-time employees, or why you didn't have as much in salaries and wages. So if you're going to have those exceptions, so if you didn't keep your workforce, you're going to have to use Form 3508. There is no dollar amount for the 3508 versus the EZ. What it is the forgiveness exception. So if you have some exceptions, you're going to have to use the full 3508. And what the SBA has said is that the EZ form should take 20 minutes to fill out, and that the full form should take 180 minutes to fill out. So that's just a guidance. Based on the documents they're asking for, I don't know if you could actually do it in 20 minutes, but we shall see. So it's going to take you longer than that to definitely gather what they're asking for. Tim, any questions at this point?
No, Janet.
Okay, good. Okay, so self-employed PPP forgiveness. We have talked about this in the past, but Schedule C filers are capped at the 2019 profit with no additional forgiveness for employer retirement and health insurance contributions. And even if you elect 24 weeks, you're going to be capped at $20,833 if you are a sole proprietor, self-employed PPP recipient. Okay, so this is where it gets fun. Let's look at the PPP form 3508. This is the EZ form. If you look, it is a one-page application. So who qualifies? If you are a self-employed borrower, independent contractor, or a sole proprietor with no employees at the time of the PPP application, you qualify. Or borrowers who didn't reduce salary or wages or employees by more than 25% and didn't cut the number of employees or paid hours. So if you maintained your workforce, you qualify for the EZ. Borrowers, the third condition is borrowers who didn't reduce salary or wages by more than 25%, but were unable to operate at the same level of business activity as before because of the specific health and safety requirements as outlined in the PPP Flexibility Act. So in instance, if you were a spa and you weren't able to get back to your number of employees because of A, the demand, and B, the amount of people that are available to work or willing to return to work, and also the county, state, municipal shutdowns, you can still use the EZ form. So you don't have to use the big long form if you can make that statement. And you actually have to check a box that says that you qualify under that. So when you do use the EZ form, there are some certifications you need to make. And I want to go through those with you. We'll take a couple minutes here. So first of all, you have to state that you used the money for the intended purpose, which is pretty straightforward. You have to say that if you used them for unauthorized purposes, you may have to pay them back. And not only that, you may have civil or criminal fraud charges filed against you. So if you used the money for payroll or for the allowed expenses, you're good. Then you have to say you didn't reduce wages by more than 25% because that was one of the criteria that was required. You have to accurately verify the payments for which you are requesting forgiveness, so make sure that they actually got paid. You have to certify that you submitted the documentation to the lender verifying those costs. You also have to state that everything you provided is true, which is logical. Then you have to say the tax documents that you submitted to the lender are similar to those that you filed with the IRS, so that you didn't change the documents in any way or alter them. And then you also have to acknowledge that the SBA has the right to ask you for further backup on any of the documents that you submit if they should choose to select your file for further investigation. In addition, you have to select one of the two options. Either number one, basically you didn't reduce employees and you met all of the conditions, or number two, you were unable to do that because there were some rules surrounding whether your business could be open and you were unable to get employees back to work. So if you can make one of those two certifications, then we're all good with the EZ form. As you can see, if we actually look at this form, it's pretty straightforward. It asks for your name, your address, your SBA application number, which if you have done your loan through us and if we are working with you on this, we have all of those numbers for you. We're actually going to fill this form out for you. If you're working with us, you won't have anything to worry about. But if you're not working with us, this is what the form looks like. So if you're working with us, we'll be reaching out to you and we'll be getting everything that we need to get this done. Okay, so the big question has been, what are they going to ask for? So if you look, this is actually from the SBA and this is the PPP. This is what documents you must submit to your lender. So the documents you're going to have to submit are going to include your payroll tax filings. And if you look at A there, they're actually also going to make you provide your bank account statement showing that not only were these filed, but the monies were paid. The other thing that they're going to want in non-payroll, the items that were outside of payroll, is they're going to want to see copy of the lender amortization schedule or receipts and also canceled checks. They're going to want to see copies of lease agreements and canceled checks, and they're going to want to see copies of invoices from February and then through your covered period, because they want to ensure that those utilities were in existence at February 15th of 2020. So that is something you could start to gather now. But this, in my opinion, this documentation is going to take more than 20 minutes to gather. So I think they're simply saying when you sit down to fill out the form, it's going to take 20 minutes. Tim, any other questions?
Yeah, Janet, I want to see if my mic will work.
Don't do that.
Hey, Janet, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, yes, I had one question. It was related to a situation where actually one of our clients has the payroll through a payroll company. And will that affect the number? And secondarily, you might bring up, what if they're using a leasing company and how does that affect it?
Okay, so two good questions. So let's start with the first one. The first one is if you are doing it through a payroll company, you'll simply be able to use the amounts that the payroll company withdrew from your bank account. However, you're going to have to add back the employer share of the payroll taxes because those don't qualify for forgiveness. And we'll be able to use those reports and those direct debits directly from your own payroll company. So that's going to make it really easy. As far as a leasing company, initially they said leased employees didn't count. Now they're saying leased employees do count. So all we'll need is a statement from the leasing company to file for forgiveness, or all you will need is a statement from the leasing company. Anything else, Tim?
Nope, that's it.
Okay, perfect. So now they have also issued guidance on documents that you should retain, but you don't need to submit. So for instance, if you are one of those people that has the employees who failed to come back to work, you're going to need to be able to have the documentation regarding the job offer that you provided to them because it was required to be in writing. So you're going to need an email, you're going to need a text message, you're going to need whatever you did to offer that position back to that employee. You don't have to submit it, but you do have to have that information. So this is all documentation that is recommended that you have in your own files in case you should get further questions from the SBA. So these are important documents, and this is something I was thinking you may want to come back to after this webinar and actually look at it and make sure that you are keeping all of this information. Okay, I think, let me stop screen sharing here, and I would say I would do that if I knew how. Okay, good, perfect. Okay, so now that's everything I had for everybody today. If there are any specific questions, I am certainly happy to address those at this point. If not, I'm thankful for all of you who have joined us today.
I got one question, Janet.
Sure.
Can you repeat the amount to add back for payroll? That's exactly what she's asking.
Oh, absolutely. So if you're using a payroll company, generally they will deduct your wages in one draft, and then they will deduct your employer and employee wages or taxes in the second draft from your bank. So what you need to add back is the employer share because those are not forgiven, only employee share. So let me give a good example. If you have $1,000 in a paycheck and $300 is deducted from the employee, and there's an additional $200 that's paid by the employer, the full $1,000 qualifies for forgiveness. It's just the $200 that's on top of the actual wage that doesn't qualify currently. Everything is currently. Another question, Tim?
Nope, that's it.
Okay. Okay, well, I'm going to be available for a couple minutes if anybody would like to have questions. Otherwise, thank you all for joining us today. And if you want to go back to our website by tomorrow, you can feel free to rewatch any portion of this or grab those copies of the application. You can just Google SBA Form 3508EZ and you'll get all of the resources that I have used in this presentation today as far as the forgiveness application. So thank you all for joining me, and I hope you have felt that we provided value to you today.